The moment I stepped into the jewelry store, I felt my breath catch. The marble floor gleamed beneath my heels, and everywhere I looked, light danced off diamonds and gold. Ethan walked beside me, his hand resting gently on the small of my back, and for a second, it felt like we were stepping into something out of a dream. My heart fluttered with anticipation, a girlish kind of hope I hadn't felt in years. Maybe, just maybe, this was his way of reminding me that romance still lived between us. He gestured toward the sleek display of men's watches, his smile calm, casual, almost too casual. "Just browsing," he said. But I couldn't ignore the little spark in his eyes. I knew that look. I'd seen it before when he was planning a surprise. My mind began to wander, painting possibilities of what he might be hiding. A necklace? Earrings? Something that would sparkle just enough to say, "I still see you. I still choose you." The thought wrapped itself around me like a warm blanket, feeding my excitement. As we moved through the glittering counters, I caught myself imagining the moment I'd open a velvet box. I'd pretend to be surprised, but deep down, my heart would be swelling with gratitude. It wasn't really about the gift, it was about the gesture, the reassurance that after all these years, I still mattered to him in that way. I thought of our anniversaries, the little ways he used to make me feel cherished, and I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, he was about to do it again. What I didn't know was that something entirely different was waiting for me. I drifted between the glass counters, my reflection mingling with rows of glittering stones, each one whispering a different promise. I could feel the gentle hum of the store around me, soft piano music, the muted chatter of other shoppers, the faint scent of polished wood and perfume in the air. It all felt like the setting for a moment I'd been secretly craving. My pulse quickened, not because I needed something expensive, but because I longed for the intimacy behind the gesture. I wanted to be reminded that I was still the woman he thought of when he walked past displays like this. I caught Ethan watching me out of the corner of his eye, his expression unreadable, but not cold. It was the kind of look that made me believe he was savoring my reaction, letting me wonder. And oh, I did wonder. My fingers brushed the edge of a velvet tray, and I pictured him later, slipping a box into my hand with that little smirk he used to wear. The thought made me smile, though I tried to hide it, as if keeping the secret between me and my own heart. The longer we lingered, the more I let myself dream. I remembered the first gift he ever gave me, a simple silver bracelet when we were just dating. I wore it until the clasp broke, not because it was expensive, but because it felt like proof of something rare, something ours. Standing there now, I let that memory mix with hope. I wanted to believe that this moment was another chance at that kind of magic, that maybe he was planning to bring it back into our lives. I leaned closer to one of the displays, letting my eyes linger on a delicate necklace that shimmered under the lights. For a moment, I imagined Ethan's voice behind me, telling the salesperson, "She'll love this one." My chest tightened with a mixture of nerves and joy, as if I were standing on the edge of a surprise I wasn't quite ready for. It felt like the kind of moment that could change the course of a day, maybe even the course of us. Ethan stood tall beside me, his posture relaxed, but I could sense something underneath it, something he wasn't saying. I wanted to believe it was anticipation, the same kind stirring inside me. I wanted to believe that behind the cool, casual exterior, he was quietly proud of what he was about to do. My imagination was running ahead of me, filling in all the blanks with love stories I desperately hoped were still true. The salesperson's approach caught my attention, their smile wide and welcoming as they made their way toward us. I straightened a little, smoothing my hair with the palm of my hand, as if preparing for the moment to finally unfold. I was ready to play along, to act surprised, to let myself feel like the center of Ethan's world again. What I didn't know then was that this smile, this simple greeting, would be the crack that let everything else spill through. The salesperson's voice was warm, familiar, almost too familiar, as they approached Ethan with a practiced smile. "Mr. Collins," they said brightly, "so nice to see you again. I hope Samantha loved the necklace you picked out last week." The words landed like shattered glass at my feet. For a split second, I didn't move. My lips were still curved in a polite smile, but inside, every nerve in my body froze. Samantha. That wasn't my name. I felt my stomach drop, the air suddenly heavy in my chest, as though the walls of the store had shifted closer. I blinked, steadying myself, forcing my face not to betray the storm brewing underneath. My ears rang, drowning out the soft piano music I'd been enjoying seconds earlier. I wanted to ask, to demand, but my voice caught in my throat, locked away by the weight of the humiliation pressing down on me. All I could do was stand there, holding on to the smile like it was a mask I couldn't let slip. Ethan's laugh came quickly, too quickly. "Oh, you must be mistaken," he stammered, his words tumbling out like marbles scattering on the floor. He reached for excuses, his charm fraying at the edges. But I had already heard enough. My mind was a carousel of disbelief, anger, and heartbreak, spinning too fast for me to step off. On the outside, I kept my composure. On the inside, I felt something sharp carve into the place where hope had been living just moments ago. I nodded faintly, as though I hadn't caught the name, but every syllable was burned into my mind. Samantha. It echoed in my head, louder than the salesperson's polite chatter, louder than Ethan's desperate fumbling to smooth it over. My fingers curled around the strap of my purse, knuckles tight as I forced myself to breathe slowly, evenly. To anyone watching, I probably looked calm, but inside, my body was shaking, my heart pounding against my ribs like it wanted out. I caught Ethan's eyes for a moment, and there it was. Panic. He was scrambling, trying to build a wall of words between me and the truth, but I'd already seen through the cracks. Every excuse he offered only deepened the silence building inside me. I didn't trust my voice to speak. I knew if I opened my mouth, the dam would break. So I did the only thing I could. I smiled politely, nodded once, and pretended I hadn't just been gutted in front of strangers. The salesperson, oblivious to the wreckage they'd caused, carried on cheerfully, presenting a new collection of pieces as though nothing had shifted. But for me, everything had shifted. The room no longer shimmered with romance. It spun like a stage where I'd been cast in the wrong role. My chest ached, and yet I straightened my shoulders, smoothing my expression as if nothing at all had pierced me. If Ethan wanted to play pretend, then I would play better. I let Ethan talk, let him weave his flimsy explanations like a man patching a boat that was already sinking. Each word felt like static in my ears, meaningless, because the damage was already done. My mind kept circling that name, Samantha, the way it rolled so casually off the salesperson's tongue. It wasn't just a slip. It was proof. Proof that Ethan had a life I wasn't invited into. One he thought he could keep hidden behind polished smiles and empty gestures. Standing there, I realized the strangest thing. I wasn't about to cry. The tears sat somewhere far away, locked behind a steel door I hadn't known existed. Instead, there was a coldness rising inside me, a sharp clarity that steadied my breathing. I felt like a performer, smiling on cue, nodding as though nothing in the world had just cracked wide open. If humiliation was meant to break me, I decided right then it wouldn't. Not here, not in front of him, not in front of anyone. So I played along. I leaned against the counter, pretending to admire a piece of jewelry. My voice smooth when I asked a harmless question, as though the ground beneath me hadn't just shifted. Ethan's relief flickered across his face, thinking he'd pulled me back into his little charade. But inside, I was no longer the hopeful woman who'd walked in dreaming of velvet boxes. Something had changed in me, and I knew the answers I needed would come later, quietly, on my own terms. Back home, the silence of our house felt heavier than usual, like every corner carried an unspoken truth. I walked through the rooms with a calmness that wasn't real, the kind of calm that hides a storm. I didn't ask Ethan a single question that night. I didn't need to. His excuses still clung to the air, flimsy and fragile, and I wasn't about to give him another chance to cover his tracks. Instead, I poured myself a glass of wine, sat at the kitchen table, and opened my laptop. Receipts, bank statements, calendar reminders, all the little breadcrumbs that people think will disappear in the shuffle of everyday life. They were all there, waiting for me. With each click, with each line of numbers and dates, the picture sharpened. Dinners in places I'd never been. Hotel bookings during weekends he swore were spent on business. Charges at the jewelry store that I knew weren't for me. Every discovery stung, but strangely it also steadied me. I wasn't guessing anymore. I was knowing. The name Samantha appeared again and again, hidden in plain sight, like a ghost haunting the edges of my marriage. And with each confirmation, the hurt I felt began to twist into something else. Something colder, sharper. Betrayal had a weight to it, yes, but it also had a fire. I could feel it rising in me, not to destroy me, but to forge me into someone stronger, someone ready to decide what came next. I took my time, scrolling through his calendar, cross-checking dates with charges on the bank account. Patterns began to emerge, almost like a cruel puzzle I hadn't agreed to play. Friday. Business dinners lined up with restaurant bills for two. Weekend conferences matched with hotel stays that stretched a little too long. My pulse stayed steady, my hands calm. But inside, each detail was another strike of the hammer, breaking apart the illusions I'd been holding on to for years. Every discovery brought back a memory. Me waiting at home, setting the table for a dinner that never happened, believing the traffic was to blame. Or the nights I fell asleep alone, convincing myself his long hours were sacrifices for our future. Now, staring at the evidence, I realized those sacrifices had been mine alone. He hadn't been building with me. He'd been escaping from me. The ache in my chest deepened, but I refused to let it bend me. By the time I closed the laptop, the truth was no longer something hidden in shadows. It was right there, glaring back at me, undeniable and raw. I sat in the quiet of the kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence, and let the weight of it settle. I wasn't confused anymore, and I wasn't naive. The man I thought I knew had betrayed me, and now he had no idea what I was capable of doing with that knowledge. I poured myself another glass of wine, the deep red swirling in the glass as though it carried the answers I already knew. My reflection in the window caught my eye. A woman who looked calm, almost too calm, considering the truth she'd just uncovered. But I realized something in that moment. I wasn't broken. I wasn't crumbling under the betrayal. Instead, I felt a strange clarity, as though the pieces of me that had been blurred by doubt were finally sharpening into focus. I thought about Samantha, this woman who had unknowingly stepped into my life, or maybe knowingly. Did she laugh at the lies he told her, the same ones he once used to charm me? Did she wear that necklace proudly, never caring that another woman's heart had paid the price for it? The thought didn't sting the way I expected. If anything, it ignited a determination in me. She could have him, but not without the truth first tearing his world apart. So I sat there, letting the clock tick past midnight, my mind already moving faster than my pulse. Revenge wasn't a scream or a scene. No, it had to be something far more elegant, something he wouldn't see coming until it was too late. And in the stillness of that kitchen, I began to shape the outline of a plan, one that would take everything he valued most and turn it into the stage for his undoing. The next morning, I greeted Ethan with a smile that felt almost effortless, though every muscle in my face was working overtime to keep it there. He kissed my cheek casually, as if the night before hadn't happened, as if he hadn't left me wide awake piecing together the truth he thought he'd hidden. I didn't confront him. I didn't raise my voice. Instead, I asked how he'd feel about throwing a dinner party to celebrate his recent promotion. His eyes lit up with pride, and I matched it with my own. He had no idea what I was really celebrating. As I stirred sugar into my coffee, I listened to him talk about guest lists, menus, and wine, nodding as though I cared about the details. Inside, I was already writing a different kind of script, a party filled with family, friends, and colleagues. The very people whose approval he worshipped would be the perfect stage. And when the curtain lifted, I wouldn't need to scream or accuse. The truth would speak for itself, and it would do so in front of everyone who mattered most to him. That day, I began making calls, my voice light and cheerful as I extended invitations. I could almost hear the pride in Ethan's voice echoing in my mind, imagining how he thought this party would be all about him. Little did he know, it would be his undoing. With every yes I received, my plan took another step toward reality. And while Ethan imagined a night of glory, I was designing something else entirely. A night of exposure, carefully wrapped in the glittering disguise of celebration. In the days leading up to the party, I became an actress in my own home. I laughed at Ethan's stories, leaned into his touch, even kissed him goodnight with a softness that almost convinced me it was real. He never suspected a thing. If anything, he seemed relieved, as though the slip at the jewelry store had been buried under the weight of my silence. What he didn't know was that silence can be far more dangerous than words. Silence can sharpen into strategy. I went through the motions of planning. Flowers for the table, a caterer who knew just how to impress, bottles of wine that whispered sophistication. Ethan was thrilled, bragging to his colleagues about how his wife always knew how to host the perfect evening. And I let him. Each detail he praised only brought me closer to the reveal. Every candle I chose, every plate I set, became a quiet piece of a puzzle he would never solve until it was too late. But the most important detail wasn't the food or the wine. It was the evidence. I tucked away the receipt from the jewelry store, neatly folded, waiting for its moment. Alongside it, I gathered copies of statements, photos, records, every scrap of proof he thought he'd hidden. It wasn't about rage anymore. It was about precision. I wasn't planning a fight. I was planning a show. And when the lights came up, Ethan wouldn't be the hero of the evening. He'd be the fool. The night of the party arrived, and our home glowed with the kind of warmth that always impressed guests, candles flickering, glasses clinking, laughter floating through the air. I moved gracefully among them, pouring wine, sharing smiles, every inch the devoted wife celebrating her husband's success. Ethan was in his element, soaking up the admiration, his hand on my waist as if we were the perfect couple. He didn't see the glint in my eyes that had nothing to do with the chandeliers. I caught snippets of conversation, his colleagues praising his work ethic, his friends raising glasses to his promotion, his family admiring the man they believed him to be. Every word of admiration felt like kindling, and I was holding the match. My calm never faltered. I laughed at jokes, complimented outfits, and played the role so convincingly that even I could almost forget what was coming. Almost. When the moment felt right, I lifted my glass, the room naturally quieting around me. All eyes turned my way, and I could feel the weight of their attention settling in. Ethan leaned closer, his smile wide, expecting me to sing his praises. I let the pause stretch, savoring the silence before I spoke. And then, with a voice as smooth as the wine in my hand, I began to thank my husband for his generosity, not just to me, but to others. I reached for the folded receipt I had kept hidden, ready to place it where everyone could see. I held the receipt in my hand, the paper light but weighted with every truth Ethan had tried to bury. The room leaned closer without moving, every guest sensing something important was about to unfold. I smiled, steady and warm, as if I were about to tell a sweet story. Ethan has always been generous, I began, my eyes sweeping the crowd. So generous, in fact, that he recently bought a beautiful necklace. I unfolded the slip of paper with a slow grace, letting the silence stretch. For Samantha! A ripple moved through the room, soft gasps, shifting chairs, the kind of stunned stillness that only comes when polite laughter turns into disbelief. Ethan's face drained of color, his mouth opening and closing without words. I didn't need to look at him to know he was unraveling. I kept my gaze on the people who mattered most to him, his family, his friends, his colleagues, watching their admiration flicker into doubt, then dissolve into judgment. Ethan reached for me, stammering, "Julia, that's not—" But I didn't flinch. I set the receipt down on the polished table where everyone could see it, its black ink cutting sharper than any knife. The room was so quiet I could hear the faint clink of a spoon against a glass in the back. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one shrinking under silence. He was, and I wasn't finished. I took a step back, giving Ethan room to drown in his own excuses. His voice cracked as he tried to string together explanations. Business clients, misunderstandings, clerical errors. The more he spoke, the more absurd it all sounded. I didn't need to argue. I just reached into the small folder I had tucked away and pulled out copies of bank statements, hotel receipts, photographs of charges he could never explain. One by one, I laid them on the table, each piece falling like a stone into water, sending ripples through the crowd. His colleagues leaned forward, their polite smiles replaced by narrowed eyes. His mother's hand flew to her mouth, her disbelief written in every line of her face. Friends who had toasted him minutes earlier now avoided his gaze, shifting uncomfortably in their seats. And Ethan, the man who had always thrived on admiration, stood in the center of it all, stripped of every ounce of dignity he once clung to. His hands trembled as he reached for the papers, but I kept my voice calm. "No need, Ethan. Everyone can see clearly now." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was thick, heavy, alive with judgment. And in that silence, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: control. I wasn't shouting, I wasn't begging, I wasn't pleading for answers. I was simply letting the truth stand where it belonged, naked in front of everyone he had tried so hard to impress. I lifted my glass one last time, my hand steady while Ethan's world crumbled at my feet. "To generosity," I said softly, my eyes fixed on him, "and to the truth that always finds its way out." I let the words hang in the air like smoke, curling through the stunned silence. Then I set my glass down, turned to the crowd with a small, composed smile, and excused myself as though I were simply leaving any other dinner party. No tears, no drama, just dignity. Behind me, voices rose in hushed whispers, chairs scraped against the floor, and Ethan's protests grew more desperate. But none of it touched me. I walked out the door without looking back, each step lighter than the last. For the first time in years, I wasn't carrying his lies, his betrayals, or his hollow promises. I was carrying myself. And that was more valuable than anything he could have ever placed in a velvet box. Weeks later, I found myself back in a jewelry store, the light catching on rows of diamonds just as it had that day with Ethan. But this time, the choice was mine. I picked a piece that made me smile, not because of what it symbolized for someone else, but because of what it meant for me. As the salesperson handed me the receipt, I glanced at the name printed neatly across the top: Julia Collins. Finally, it was mine.
You have 2 weeks to clear out your office, my brother said, dropping the termination papers on my desk with a satisfied smirk. The board has unanimously voted to remove you as chief archivist. Grandfather's will was quite clear. Leadership of the Montgomery Historical Foundation belongs to me now. I stared at him, struggling to process his words. This can't be right, Nathan. Grandfather promised me. Promises mean nothing without legal documentation, Eleanor, he interrupted, adjusting his perfectly tailored suit. Perhaps if you'd spent less time buried in your precious artifacts and more time understanding how the real world works, you wouldn't be so shocked. My name is Eleanor Montgomery, 36 years old, and until 5 minutes ago, the chief archivist of the Montgomery Historical Foundation, a prestigious institution dedicated to preserving our city's history, established by my grandfather, Edward Montgomery, over 60 years ago. The foundation housed irreplaceable historical documents, photographs, and artifacts that told the story of Westbrook, from its founding in 1782 to the present day. For 15 years, I had dedicated my life to expanding and preserving our collections, earning a doctoral degree in archival science and turning down prestigious positions at major museums to continue my grandfather's legacy. Nathan, my older brother by 3 years, had shown little interest in the foundation until recently, right around the time he discovered its substantial endowment and valuable real estate holdings. The official transition ceremony will be next Friday, Nathan continued, glancing around my office with calculating eyes. The mayor and several major donors will be attending. I trust you'll make yourself scarce. Grandfather would never have left the foundation to you, I said, finding my voice at last. He knew you have no interest in historical preservation. You've never spent a single day working here. Nathan's smile didn't reach his eyes. That shows how little you knew him. In his final months, he realized the foundation needed stronger leadership, business leadership. All your careful cataloging and community programs are charming, but they don't secure the financial future of this institution. By financial future, you mean selling off parts of the collection and converting the West Wing into luxury condos. I asked, recalling the architectural plans I'd accidentally discovered on his tablet during our last family dinner. A flicker of surprise crossed his face before he composed himself. The foundation needs to evolve, Eleanor. Some assets are more valuable when liquidated than preserved. Grandfather understood that in the end. I thought of my grandfather, his passion for history, his meticulous approach to preservation, and his absolute commitment to keeping the Montgomery collection intact and accessible to the public. The man Nathan described was unrecognizable to me. When did he change the will? I asked quietly. 2 months before he died, Nathan replied, straightening a paperweight on my desk. After his stroke, when he was thinking clearly about the future. Now, I suggest you start packing. And Eleanor, he added, his voice hardening, don't get any ideas about removing anything from the archives. Everything here belongs to the foundation, to me, now. After he left, I sat motionless, staring at the termination papers. 2 months before his death, Grandfather had been in the hospital, barely able to sign his name, let alone make complex legal decisions. Something didn't add up. My office phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. Eleanor? It's Mabel. I just saw Nathan leaving. Did he? Yes. I cut in, relieved to hear from Grandfather's longtime assistant and my most trusted colleague. He's taking over. Says Grandfather changed his will after the stroke. There was a long pause. That's impossible, Mabel finally said, her voice unusually sharp. Edward made me promise not to tell anyone, but after the stroke, he was worried Nathan might try something like this. He had me witness a new will, one that explicitly named you as his successor and included specific provisions to prevent the collection from being sold off. My heart raced. Where is this will? Why wasn't it presented at the reading? That's the problem, Mabel sighed. Edward gave it to his attorney, Samuel Hayes. But Sam died in that car accident 3 weeks after Edward passed. His practice was taken over by his nephew, who claims he never found the document. I've been trying to track it down, but she trailed off. Nathan got to the nephew. I finished her thought. Paid him off to lose the will. I can't prove it, Mabel said carefully, but I witnessed that will, Eleanor. It exists, or it existed. And there's something else. Your grandfather left you a message, something about looking where the past and present meet, and that the Montgomery secret isn't in the regular archives. I assumed he was delirious from medication, but now I wonder. After hanging up, I sat back, my mind racing. Where the past and present meet, and not in the regular archives. It sounded like one of the riddles grandfather used to create for me when I was young, teaching me about hidden histories and the importance of looking beyond the obvious. I glanced at my watch. It was nearly 6 p.m., and most of the staff would be leaving. If I was going to search for whatever grandfather might have hidden, tonight would be my best opportunity. As darkness fell and the foundation emptied, I began my search, starting in grandfather's old office, now Nathan's, which connected to my smaller workspace. Nothing seemed out of place or unusual. I checked behind paintings, under floorboards, inside hollow books, all the hiding places grandfather had shown me over the years, but found nothing. Hours passed as I methodically worked my way through the building, focusing on areas that had special meaning to grandfather. The rare document room, the photographic archive, the map collection. Nothing. Exhausted and discouraged, I found myself in the foundation's central atrium around midnight. This grand space featured a magnificent grandfather clock that had been keeping time since the building opened in 1960. It stood at the exact spot where, according to local history, the city's founding documents had been signed in 1782. Where the past and present meet, I whispered, looking up at the clock. The clock's steady ticking was the only sound in the empty building as I approached it. Grandfather had been obsessed with this timepiece, insisting on winding it himself every Sunday without fail. After his stroke, he'd made me promise to continue the tradition. I opened the clock's case, expecting to find only the pendulum and weights. Instead, there was a small brass key taped to the inside of the door, with a note in grandfather's shaky hand. For my true hair, the foundation's foundation. My hands trembled as I removed the key. The foundation's foundation, another riddle. What was the foundation of the foundation? The answer came to me in a flash. The cornerstone. When the building was constructed, grandfather had insisted on placing a time capsule in the cornerstone, to be opened on the foundation's 100th anniversary. That was still 40 years away, but perhaps. The cornerstone was located in the building's basement, behind a decorative panel in what was now used as a storage room. Few people even knew it existed anymore. I made my way down the darkened stairs, using my phone's flashlight to guide me. The storage room was cluttered with old exhibition materials, broken display cases, and outdated office furniture. It took me nearly 30 minutes to clear a path to the far wall where the cornerstone was located. The decorative panel came away easily, revealing the massive stone block with M.M.T.F. 1960 carved into its face. Next to the cornerstone was a small, almost invisible keyhole. The brass key fit perfectly. With a soft click, a hidden drawer slid out from beneath the cornerstone. A drawer that, according to the building's plans, shouldn't exist. Inside was a leather portfolio and a sealed envelope with my name on it. My hands shook as I opened the envelope first. My dearest Eleanor, if you're reading this, then my fears about Nathan have proven correct. I've always known that his interest in our family's legacy extended only to its monetary value. But in my final months, he has become increasingly bold in his inquiries about the foundation's assets and endowment. What Nathan doesn't know, what no one outside the direct Montgomery line has ever known, is that the true value of our family's legacy isn't in the buildings or the official collections, but in what I've gathered in this portfolio. When your great-great-grandfather established himself in Westbrook, he did so by acquiring historical documents that powerful families wanted kept private. Not to blackmail, but to preserve the complete truth of our city's history, both glorious and shameful. For 5 generations, we Montgomerys have been the secret keepers of Westbrook, collecting and protecting the uncomfortable truths that others would prefer to erase. The portfolio contains my true will, witnessed and notarized, leaving you in control of the foundation with specific provisions to prevent the collection from being sold. But it also contains something far more valuable. Documentation of the secret history of Westbrook's 5 founding families, including the Caldwells. Nathan's father-in-law, Judge Richard Caldwell, would be particularly disturbed to learn that these papers exist, especially as he campaigns for the state Supreme Court. The Caldwell family fortune was built on land seized through forged deeds in the 1850s, land taken from the very people they claim to be helping. I've never used these archives as leverage that would betray the historian's sacred trust. But I've always made sure the relevant families know that a complete and accurate history exists, safely preserved by our family. Use this knowledge wisely, Eleanor. Not to threaten, but to protect our mission. The truth is a powerful tool when wielded with integrity. All my love. Grandfather. I opened the portfolio with trembling hands. Inside, I found grandfather's true will, exactly as Mabel had described, along with a collection of documents, photographs, and letters dating back to the 1800s. Most shocking were the papers related to the Caldwell family, land deeds with clearly forged signatures, private letters admitting to the fraud, and photographs documenting the family's intimate connection to city officials who helped cover up their misdeeds. No wonder Nathan had been so determined to gain control of the foundation. His father-in-law, Judge Caldwell, must have put him up to it, hoping to finally locate and destroy these documents before they could derail his Supreme Court ambitions. But what should I do with this information? Grandfather had never used it for leverage or personal gain. He had simply preserved it, honoring his commitment to maintaining a complete historical record. I carefully replaced everything in the portfolio. Dawn was breaking as I made my way back upstairs, the key and portfolio hidden safely in my bag. I had 1 week before the official transition ceremony, 1 week to decide how to proceed. The Montgomery Historical Foundation was unusually busy that Friday evening. Local dignitaries, board members, and majordomers filled the atrium, sipping champagne and waiting for the ceremony to begin. Nathan stood in the center of it all, receiving congratulations and sharing his visionary plans for the foundation's future. I waited in my office, my former office, watching through the window as Judge Caldwell arrived, clapping Nathan on the shoulder with paternal pride. They'd been thick as thieves since Nathan married the judge's daughter 5 years ago. Now I understood why. A soft knock at my door announced Mabel's arrival. "Everything's ready," she said, her eyes bright with anticipation. "The mayor just arrived. They're about to begin." I nodded, gathering my courage and the leather portfolio. "Let's not keep them waiting then." The atrium fell silent as I walked to the podium, Nathan's expression shifting from surprise to annoyance. "Eleanor," he hissed as I passed him, "what do you think you're doing? We agreed you wouldn't be here." I smiled politely. "I wouldn't miss this for the world, Nathan. It's a historic occasion." Before he could stop me, I reached the podium and addressed the crowd. "Thank you all for coming to this important transition in the Montgomery Historical Foundation's history. For over 60 years, this institution has been dedicated to preserving the complete and accurate history of Westbrook, both the stories we celebrate and those we might prefer to forget." Nathan was moving toward me now, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. Judge Caldwell watched with growing concern. "My grandfather believed that history belongs to everyone, not just those with the power to write it. He dedicated his life to ensuring that our city's full story would be preserved for future generations." I removed grandfather's will from the portfolio and held it up, which is why I'm pleased to share that I've located my grandfather's true final will, properly witnessed and notarized, in which he explicitly names me as his successor and includes specific provisions preventing the foundation's collection from being sold or dismantled. Gasps and murmurs spread through the crowd. Nathan froze mid-step. "Unfortunately," I continued, "this will was somehow misplaced after my grandfather's death, and a different document was presented instead, one that supposedly named my brother as successor, despite his complete lack of experience in historical preservation." Nathan reached the podium, gripping my arm. "That's enough," he growled. "You're embarrassing yourself." Actually, came a new voice from the back of the room. "I think we should hear Ms. Montgomery out." The crowd parted to reveal District Attorney Maria Santos, whom I contacted earlier that week. Beside her stood Samuel Hayes' nephew, looking decidedly uncomfortable. "Mr. Hayes has provided my office with a very interesting statement regarding the handling of Edward Montgomery's will." The DA continued, moving forward. "It seems he was offered a substantial sum to misplace certain documents." Judge Caldwell had gone pale, while Nathan's grip on my arm tightened painfully. "You have no idea what you're doing," he whispered. "The Caldwells will destroy you." I smiled sadly at my brother. "No, Nathan, they won't. Because unlike you, I understand what the Montgomery legacy really means." I turned back to the assembled guests. Today's ceremony will proceed as planned, but with an important correction. As per my grandfather's legitimate will, I will continue to serve as the Foundation's director, and my first act will be to announce a special new exhibition examining the complex history of Westbrook's founding families, including previously unseen documents from our private archives. I looked directly at Judge Caldwell as I said this. His expression told me he understood perfectly what documents I was referring to. Of course, I added, this exhibition will be presented in the spirit my grandfather always insisted upon, not to shame or accuse, but to acknowledge our complete history, so that we can move forward with honesty and integrity. The aftermath was both more dramatic and more subdued than I expected. Nathan resigned from the Foundation's board the following Monday, citing personal reasons. Judge Caldwell quietly withdrew his candidacy for the state Supreme Court 2 weeks later. The exhibition went forward as planned, though I was careful to present the Caldwell documents in their proper historical context, without sensation or accusation. History, after all, is rarely about heroes and villains. It's about human beings making choices in complex circumstances. 6 months later, I sat in grandfather's old office, my office now, organizing materials for our newest acquisition, the complete archives of the city's first hospital, which had operated from 1820 to 1945. The Foundation was thriving, with increased attendance, new community programs, and a reinvigorated mission. A knock at the door interrupted my work. To my surprise, it was Nathan, looking older and less polished than when I'd last seen him. "Eleanor," he said awkwardly, hovering in the doorway. "Do you have a minute?" I gestured to the chair across from my desk, studying my brother's face. He'd lost weight, and there was a humility in his bearing that I'd never seen before. "I owe you an apology," he said after a long silence. "Several, actually. You tried to steal my inheritance and destroy grandfather's legacy." I replied evenly, "So yes, I'd say an apology is in order." Nathan winced. "It wasn't just about the money, you know? Not at first. Richard, Judge Caldwell, convinced me that the Foundation was wasting its potential under your leadership, that we could transform it into something more prestigious, more influential, more profitable," I added. "Yes," he admitted. "That too. But I never knew about the documents, not until Richard became desperate to find them. By then, I was in too deep. I considered my brother thoughtfully. Despite everything, he was still family, the only close family I had left." "What will you do now?" I asked. "I've taken a teaching position at the community college," he said with a small smile. "American history. Turns out I've developed a genuine interest in the subject, albeit too late." "It's never too late to develop an appreciation for history," I said, unconsciously echoing grandfather's words. "That's rather the point of preservation, making sure the past remains accessible to the present." Nathan nodded, then reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small object, our grandfather's pocket watch, which I believed lost after his death. "I took this," he admitted, placing it on the desk between us. "I shouldn't have. It belongs with the Foundation, with you." I picked up the watch, feeling its familiar weight. Grandfather would be pleased to know it's found its way home. As Nathan left, I opened the watch, smiling at the inscription inside. "Time reveals all truths. E.M." Grandfather had been right, of course. The truth had eventually come to light, as it almost always does. My job, the Montgomery family's true legacy, was to make sure it remained visible to all who cared to look, not hidden away in cornerstone drawers or basement archives, but properly preserved, contextualized, and shared. I placed the watch in the display case beside my desk, next to the brass key that had led me to the hidden portfolio. Together, they serve as daily reminders that history isn't just about preserving the past. It's about protecting the truth for the future, regardless of who might prefer it remained forgotten.